Welcome to Module 4. In this module, we're going to go through your emotions in a little bit more detail, how to master your emotional state, and we're also going to dive into our thoughts and a little bit about some thought repatterning exercises we can take part in, and this is one of my favorite modules. So first and foremost, there tends to be this negative association, at least in Western society, with people being too emotional. And I think this is so interesting. And because we'll sort of have this idea that like emotions can be unsafe, or that, they can make us weak if we're expressing them too much. And the reality is emotions are very positive things. They are your individual feedback messengers, as I was mentioning earlier. They're here to basically show you to yourself. They're here to help you make the subconscious contents of your mind conscious so that you can do something with them. And there's a major difference between feeling emotions and reacting versus feeling emotions and going inward and reflecting. So, what would be negatively emotional is if I felt the emotion of anger and so I decided to hit somebody with my car, right? That would be a negative response to my emotions. A positive emotional response to anger might be to allow myself to feel the anger, to question the story that creates the anger, and to identify the underlying need that might be unmet so I can go address it. Maybe I have to have a healthy conversation, a transparent form of communication with somebody in my life. And the lack of that was creating some form of anger. So emotions are not good and bad, or not healthy or unhealthy. Emotions are always healthy, but it's the way that we respond to our emotions that can be healthy or unhealthy, good or bad. So that's something I really want you to know. And no matter what's happening in your life, you are also entitled to your emotional response. We never want to make our emotional responses negative or invalid. We don't want to be invalidating our feelings and emotions. And the reason for this is that emotions are like real neurochemical experiences that you're having. Nobody can tell you you can't be angry, you shouldn't be sad, because those emotions are real neurochemical experiences that you are having. And so there's a big difference, again, not just by health versus unhealth, through how we respond to our emotions, but also through what creates the emotions. So let's say I'm sad because I believe that nobody in the world cares about me, and let's pretend that I have a rich community and network of people that do. If I tell myself that story, those emotions that are the output or the effect of that story are still real and still valid, even though the story may not be valid. And so emotions are really helping us to sort of decode the content that's happening beneath them. And that's the work that this is sort of all about in this module, is how to identify those contents in real time and do something about it. So again, emotions are not positive or negative. They are real, valid neurochemical reactions. So sometimes I'll see people and they'll judge themselves for their emotional responses to things. They'll think like, oh, that was disproportionate to the experience, or they'll judge themselves like, I shouldn't have been so angry, I shouldn't have felt the way that I felt. And this is not true. Again, your emotions are just giving you feedback, and it doesn't matter how small the experience is that you're reacting to. It's not about the experience anyways. It's about the meaning that you're giving to the experience. So using that example from in the earlier modules, when we're discussing the lady who came in and she was so frustrated and so angry about the laundry might seem like a really small thing. But if she judged herself and shamed herself for her emotional response to the laundry, she's too busy judging and criticizing herself and then perpetuating her emotional suffering to actually be able to step back and reflect and find the root cause of why the laundry was causing her so much pain. And in her case, if you remember, it was about her feeling that she was disrespected. And disrespected, if that's a core wound and that was something that you felt like a lot of in earlier memories of past experiences, then of course you're going to feel really charged. So remember, don't judge or criticize yourself for what you're emotionally responding to. Just go inwards and inquire. Anything that we're feeling bad about, as long as we add a level of self-shaming or self-guilting or self-judging to it, we prevent ourselves from having the clarity to actually go underneath and find the root cause of what's creating that disproportionate reaction to the problem and thus resolve it. So again, we don't want to judge ourselves for the surface symptoms of things. We want to use those surface symptoms as feedback mechanisms to go underneath and address the problem at the root. In this case, the meaning you're giving to the situation. So emotions are there to help you make that subconscious content conscious so that you have the availability to actually create resolution. And I want you to think of hunger for a moment. Hunger, when we look at hunger, emotions are really not that much different. What is hunger? Well, hunger is a visceral response in your body, right? Like you might feel hunger pains or an emptiness in your stomach. It's created by neurochemicals. So leptin and ghrelin are the hunger regulation neurochemicals, and they are giving you feedback to go fix a problem. We don't look at people when we're hungry and be like, it's your fault that I'm hungry. I can't believe you're making me hungry. We don't blame other people for our hunger. Our hunger is our hunger, and it's our feedback so that we can go do something with it. We can go fix the problem. Our emotions are the exact same thing. They're neurochemical reactions. They create visceral sensations in our body. Sometimes we feel sadness in our throat and sinuses, or fear in our gut or our chest. And they are giving us feedback to go fix a problem. But we treat emotions so differently from hunger. Our emotions are our emotions, just like our hunger is our hunger. And both of them are there to serve us and help us to become safe or healthy or the highest expressions of ourselves. And to treat them differently is to perpetuate our own suffering. So we want to make that big perceptual shift in relationship to what our emotions actually are. And we want to have a healthy relationship to our emotions. We want to react to them in a healthy way, and we want to use them in a healthy way instead of our emotions using us. I'm sure everybody can relate to having this, being overcome by an emotional experience, doing something so reactively, and then looking back afterwards and being like, oh, that was so out of character. I can't believe I reacted that way. What happened to me? Well, what that's an example of is your emotions making you more unconscious, taking you over, and then you sort of being possessed by your emotions instead of the other way around. And so I want you to note one other thing when it comes to emotions. People aren't making you feel anything. They are helping you feel what's already living inside of you. So as an example, if I come to you and I say, you're the cookie monster, and I say that to you 15 times, and I say it with, so much intensity and seriousness, it doesn't matter how many times I say that to you. If there's no part of you that believes that about yourself, I'm never going to be able to hurt your feelings. So when they filter. So again, weigh you're the cookie monster next to you're not a good parent, or something that you might have all this fear around and all these self-judgments around. One is going to hurt like crazy and the other thing can't touch you. So again, your emotions are for you and they're yours. And it's the content beneath them that's yours to fix or resolve or reprogram. And it's the way you respond to them, sort of above them, the actions and behaviors you create as a result of them, that are also yours to be in charge of. So, just a little review of emotions. All decisions we make are based on emotions. Neuroscience has proven this. All emotions are valid neurochemical experiences. If you have people around you that are invalidating your emotions, it's probably just out of their own unconsciousness and they don't know any better. But don't let somebody's opinion of your emotions invalidate your emotional experience. Your emotional experience is yours, and it's there for very positive outcomes to happen as long as you're inquiring instead of judging. And there's a big difference as well between dissociating from your emotions. And examples of this would be like, I feel hurt or sad or emotional, and I scroll through social media incessantly as a form of escapism or ignoring my feelings. Or I drink a bottle of wine as soon as I get home from work to numb the pain. Or I use substances, or I binge watch television, and all of these are basically subtle attempts to just dissociate from your emotions and not be in your emotional experience itself. And witnessing your emotions, which is going to be a really important part of emotional mastery, is a very different experience. When we witness our emotions, so when we can actually sort of separate ourselves from our emotional experience so that we can watch what's actually happening when we feel triggered, when we feel emotional, it's actually a form of disidentification. And it's in disidentifying from our emotional state that we actually get full access to being in charge of our emotions themselves. So I'm going to give you an example here. Let's say that a friend comes over and they say, hey, I'm having a really off day, and I just need a friend to talk to. I just need somebody to listen for a little bit. And you're like, okay, let me listen to you, but let me drink a bottle of wine first to just be able to deal with you. Or let me sit here with you, and while you're talking to me, I'm just going to scroll through social media the entire time and not look at you. Or let me, smoke weed, and then I can try to deal with you. All of these things would really hurt that person. You wouldn't be present. It would be a form of almost ignoring the person or trying to dismiss them. And this is what we're doing in the relationship to ourselves a lot of the time. Now, imagine that next to you actually being able to sit with the person, be fully present, listen to what they're feeling, ask questions, inquire further. This would be a healthy way to treat a friend, and this is the same healthy way to treat your own emotional experience. You want to be present, you want to inquire, you want to ask more questions so you can find out about the roots of the problem, and you want to be fully present with yourself the entire time. We only can do this through witnessing our emotions as the first step. So what does witnessing our emotions really mean? Well, all emotions are basically the reflection of the mind and the body. They're sensations that are taking place in your body, like I was mentioning. Sadness might feel like a tightness in your throat. Fear or anger might be experienced in the chest or shoulders or arms. And there's a really amazing experiment where researchers took participants and they put them into fMRI scanners. And as they put them into these scanners, they asked participants of the study to recall painful experiences they had, like a really sad memory, and to discuss it. And researchers saw, if you've ever seen that diagram of the brain from the top down, and you've got like your neocortex, and you've got your limbic system with all the emotional structures of the brain, and the hedonic highway where we experience a lot of our pain and pleasure centers, and then we've got our reptilian brain with more primitive brain structures. And researchers found that when participants were recalling really painful emotional experiences, a lot of brain activity in the neocortex, which has things like your prefrontal cortex, which help you to be logical and analytical and think things through and process information clearly and cognitively. A lot of activity shut down and sort of turned off in those regions, and a lot of the limbic system and the reptilian brain, where like a lot of our fight and flight responses happen, really lit up. And then researchers asked the participants to just witness their emotions, like notice the sensations that are happening in your body, and then label the emotion itself. And what researchers found is that right away brain activity lit back up in the neocortex. So it was this way of bringing our logical thinking, highest sort of versions, most conscious versions of ourselves essentially, back into the mix and turning ourselves back on so that we can gain more emotional mastery and control. So when you are feeling charged or triggered, one of the first things that you want to do is notice what emotions you're feeling and where you're feeling the sensations of that emotion in your body. So for example, let's say that you are having a conversation with a friend and you start feeling triggered. You have to, as quickly as possible, be able to witness, sort of fall behind the emotion and notice, wow, I'm feeling angry, or I'm feeling really hurt right now. And where do I experience this in my body? Oh, it's like a heaviness in my chest, and the anger sort of taking place in my arms and shoulders. And it will be a slightly different experience for different people, but most of us tend to feel patterns of the same emotions in relatively the same places. Sometimes we'll feel shame or embarrassment in our head and neck and upper chest. A lot of panic and fear we'll feel in the stomach or in the upper chest, sort of a tightness. A lot of anger we'll feel, again, down our neck, back, shoulders. And so we'll add some diagrams just to show you the different ways that we tend to experience emotions. Again, just so it's sort of like that analogy of being able to find your way more easily from one end of the house to the other in the pitch black, because you've already had the experience of turning on the lights. The more we can bring our conscious awareness into this subconscious process, what's happening out of our awareness on autopilot throughout the day, the more simple it is for us to actually navigate these experiences and then do the work that we need to in order to change the programming so these things don't have to come back. So number one, in this exercise, I want you to notice that emotion, again, it makes the subconscious conscious. So when you are feeling negative emotion, I want you to witness the emotion. Ask yourself, where is this taking place in my body? And I want you to Describe the sensations that you experience alongside this emotion. And this exercise is there and available to you in your workbook just to bring this information to the conscious surface. You also have a list of all these major negative emotions and their opposites on the positive side. And I just want you to circle on that list your top 8 or 9 emotional patterns that you tend to experience the most of. Because again, we all tend to experience emotions in our individual patterns. We'll feel a certain set of emotions and others won't feel very many of those same emotions. So it's a very individualistic process. So notice that, and then as we go into the next module around our thoughts, I'm going to give you the next steps to actually do the work to change the contents of what's creating that emotional response, the effect that's going on underneath. So the purpose of this exercise is to really notice the relationship between your thoughts and emotions. So, what you're essentially trying to do is realize that thoughts produce emotional feelings. And it's not just your thoughts, but these things tend to go together. It can be our beliefs, it can be our subconscious programs, there's associations being activated, but there's a really strong and important relationship to recognize between our thoughts and our feelings. So we're just going to make a list of the top emotions we tend to experience. You can use your emotions list at the back of the workbook if it's helpful for you. And then you're just trying to make this relationship between your thoughts and feelings or emotions conscious, okay? So you can see here really clearly, I feel anxious and lonely when I'm thinking about the potential of being alone forever. Well, you can imagine if you're thinking about being alone forever, you're going to feel the emotions of loneliness and anxiety, right? So, when you feel helpless or trapped, maybe you're thinking about, I am thinking about how I have no control over my life, finances, and future, right? Well, then you're definitely going to end up, as you're thinking those thoughts and perceiving things in that way, you're going to end up feeling that distress. Maybe you say, I feel frustrated and angry when I ruminate about people who hurt me in the past, right? So then that's a great way to feel frustrated and angry. I'm not saying we shouldn't feel these things. I'm saying we should do something productive with it. We should question our stories. We should meet our needs, and not just get stuck in the rumination. So you're going to go through and you're going to pick different types of emotions that you feel. And you can kind of try to line them up here a little bit so they match up with your other side. I'm not sure why it won't let me do that. There we go. And so you're going to essentially be here writing and sort of recognizing when I'm feeling this way, it's because I'm thinking these things. And this is really going to set you up for the next exercises we're about to do together. Welcome to Module 4, Part 2. In this module, we're going to go through our thoughts and a little bit about how to reprogram our thinking. So, before I get into all this amazing content, and this is one of my favorite processes ever that I've developed and that I've used personally so much, before I get into all this content, I just want to do a quick little recap so we know where our thoughts are sort of taking place in this whole paradigm of everything that you're learning. So remember, we start off, we come into the world, we have maybe a certain genetic predisposition, but we largely have very few fears. We only have those 3 biological fears that we're born with. And then there's these different ways that we pick up our programs, those 3 major ways that we pick up our programs, what we hear over time, what we see repetitively, or what we have firsthand experiences of. And those programs create part of this filter that we come to see our reality through. We sort of make these inferences about these programs, which are our beliefs about ourselves, about our environment, about other people, about our experiences. And then we constantly reproject those beliefs from the past onto the present. And again, it's sort of like our windshield that we see the world through. And if we don't clean that windshield, then it makes us run into all of these challenges while we're driving through the course of our life. So we have these core wounds from childhood Those beliefs create those thoughts create those emotions are made up of neurochemical reactions. We take action, or we make emotionally based decisions and behaviors based on those emotions themselves, and then that cycle refeeds itself at any point. And so as we're doing this reprogramming work and we're creating changes, as we dive into the reprogramming in the latter half of this course, I want you to know as well that you can hack that equation at any point. You can do the belief repatterning exercise we were mentioning earlier. You can change and reprogram your thinking on a very regular basis to create a lot of transformation. You can use specific reprogramming tools that we'll go over in the last module, or you can change your actions and behaviors to create a change in that paradigm and in that cycle. And your emotions are always there to help you navigate on either side of that equation. They're always giving you that feedback so you can do the work around it. So as we go through this, I want you to think of your filter as something that's sort of like computer code. You might have had a set of computer code that served you for a very long time. But just like anything else, we can go back in there and we can change the programming, and it creates a different output and a different experience. And remember as well that your beliefs tend to become self-fulfilling prophecies a lot of the time. If I go into a job interview and I feel not good enough, and I'm running this whole story of how I'm not good enough, how do I feel and how do I show up? Like the best version of myself, or like the not so best version of myself? Obviously the latter. And so again, we want to become in charge of these beliefs and aware of them, and aware of the thoughts and the actions and emotions that accompany them, so we can create change at every level. So we went through how to find a core belief, and we went through what our emotions are really there for and how to repattern some of that. We went through how to actually understand where all these beliefs come from and our early experiences and Amy's story and classical conditioning. And now I'm going to give you a little bit more information about our thoughts themselves, because if we are thinking roughly 60 to 70,000 thoughts per day, and if roughly 50,000 of them are just repetitive thoughts from the day before, we can do a lot of work to change our programming through our thinking. And remember, as I was saying earlier, there aren't really idle thoughts. We don't really think thoughts that don't have some kind of positive or negative emotion attached to them. So at any given moment, your thoughts are either kind of serving you to repattern and reprogram some limitations that you're experiencing, or they are acting as a detriment towards you, and they're weighing you down and further enforcing even more negative programs that already might exist. And thoughts that are repeated over time that have an emotional response create that belief in the first place. So this equation, remember, it's not just linear going one way. It sort of comes back and cycles through itself at any given point. Just like actions, for example, if we do something mean and we yell at somebody, it might further reinforce a belief that we are bad people, if that's something we're carrying in our subconscious. So when we go into our thoughts today, I want you to notice first that you are not your thoughts. We spend a lot of time, there's a Descartes quote that a lot of our foundations and schools of thought were built upon, and it says, I think, therefore I am. And, we spend a lot of time thinking that we are our thoughts, we are our mind. But we're not. We're the awareness behind. If you have the ability, for example, to observe that this is a remote, obviously you're not the remote because you have the capacity to observe it. It is separate from yourself. And if you can observe your thoughts that are running all day, if you can observe that narration or internal dialogue, obviously you're not that either. So what you really are is the higher level of conscious awareness that has the ability to access or notice that you think at any point in time. And if you can notice that you can think, you can change what you're thinking about just through conscious and intentional will. And it's through changing that what you think repetitively over time that produces an emotional response that helps you to rewire the entire paradigm of anything you don't like. And remember, because these things tend to become self-fulfilling, if I think I'm not good enough and I keep focusing on that, then I'm more likely to create things that enforce that. And if I'm feeling that I am good enough and I keep feeding that cycle intentionally, I'm likely to feel more free, more confident, and like the highest expression of myself going through life. So remember, your emotions are giving you feedback oftentimes not just for what you're believing, but also what you're thinking. And you want to start building that relationship to your emotions, that they're kind of like alarm bells going off to let you know when you're not really thinking the best thoughts. Your emotions are often letting you know when your thoughts are out of alignment with truth. And so one of the best opportunities for reprogramming is actually in the moment itself that you're triggered. And in order to do this, we first have to use our emotions as the feedback that they are in real time. So I want you to imagine that this is you. You're about to go into this job interview and you start feeling this rush of insecurity and fear and panic. One of the first questions you would ask yourself would be, okay, what am I thinking that's causing me to feel this way? Because remember, right behind emotions were first your thoughts. And when we stop automatically believing our thoughts, like think of it this way. When your thoughts are running on autopilot, because you're not making them conscious and questioning them, you are emotionally responding to them as if they are the truth. So let's say you go into that interview, you're walking in and you're like, he's going to think I'm not educated enough. The interviewer is going to think that I'm not prepared enough. They're going to judge me for the outfit that I'm wearing. They're going to think that I'm not very articulate. And let's say you're running all these thoughts. These are all stories. You can't know that any of this is about to happen. And you definitely can't know that this person is going to judge you in a very specific way. You're not a mind reader. So you're thinking these thoughts, you're creating your own suffering, you're creating your own emotional output. And that's not helping you to become more articulate or to discuss your education and experience more effectively. It's just, again, becoming self-fulfilling. So we have to stop that process. We have to get off autopilot. And again, that's what your emotions are there to do. They're there to actually bring you inwards. And so if you can witness this experience, not attached to it, but recognize that you're not your thoughts, you're not your emotions, you're the awareness of them when you choose to focus from your conscious mind, then what you'll start realizing is that you can control them from that space. So, okay, if I'm feeling insecure, what thoughts was I just thinking walking into this interview that were making me feel this way? Okay, I was thinking that I'm not educated enough. Okay, is that true? You want to question these things. Is that true? If that was true, would I be invited for an interview? What is positive about my education? Look for proof. So you want to start changing the thoughts that you're having in favor of producing a desired outcome instead of this not desired outcome. Okay, so I'm going to give you a few steps to work at the thought level. We're sort of tying some earlier pieces together to create a full curriculum here. And if you look in your workbook, you have this, it's under the transformation method. And this is something you can use in real time, and this is something you can use as an emotional processing tool at the end of the day if there's something that you're feeling stuck on that you haven't resolved from earlier. So number one, you feel triggered. Instead of reacting outwards, reflect inwards. So witness and label your emotion. Just like in that fMRI scanner where people turned brain activity back on in their neocortex just by witnessing and labeling the emotions they were feeling. And then ask yourself, what thoughts am I thinking that are creating this emotional output? So you're going backwards, you're reflecting, and you'll see them. They're always right there waiting for you to notice what they are. And then I want you to question these thoughts. Can I really know that these things are true, or are these just assumptions? And as you question them, I want you to then find proof of the opposite. So we're sort of pulling from that belief programming we're doing earlier, but we're using this process in real time around our thinking. We're not trying to find the core belief first and then dive in. We're just using this in real time around our thinking. And I want you to know that you can just change your thinking around the situation too. It doesn't have to be very cut and dry. You don't have to go, I'm good enough because. You can just say, you know what, I can't know that this person's going to think I'm not good enough. They called me for the interview, so obviously I have a chance. Let me focus on the solution instead of feeding the problem. You can update your thoughts however you would like so that you're just not feeding this old program running on autopilot, continuously reinforcing itself and waiting to keep popping back up at very inconvenient times of your life. So I'm going to review this process with you one more time, and this time I'm going to use the example from earlier of the woman and her laundry, and I'm going to go through and just show you the actual steps that this took. Okay, so this woman's having all these painful thoughts about her husband, how her husband doesn't respect her, she's being disrespected, she's not cared about, and she's running all these painful stories. And so she's experiencing, imagine for a moment that she's doing this on her own. She's experiencing all these negative emotions, and she's like, okay, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm hurt. Okay, so what meaning am I giving to the situation that's causing me to feel this way? What thoughts am I thinking? And then she goes, okay, well, I'm believing that my husband doesn't respect me. I think that I don't matter, that he doesn't care about me. And then she questions these things and she looks for proof of otherwise. So she says, you know what? My husband's been a really good partner in so many other ways. He always shows up for me. He always asks me how I'm feeling. He's present with me in so many different aspects of our relationship. So she goes through and she finds, and what she's doing, because remember, each of these thought processes comes with emotion. So if she's thinking one way, she's feeling one way. If she's intentionally breaking the pattern, so she's interrupting this pattern of just running that cycle on autopilot, and then she starts substituting that pattern with something that's even more obvious to her, even more true. And she starts going, okay, well, my husband's been fantastic in this way. He's been showing up in that way. And as she's doing these things, she's also impacting her emotional output. Because how do you feel when you're thinking that somebody you really love and care about doesn't love you, doesn't care about you, versus how do you feel when you start questioning that story, relieving yourself of that unnecessary suffering that you're just self-creating on autopilot, and then substituting in stories that are much more true and valid and valuable? Well, you start creating a certain emotional output intentionally and consciously, okay? And when you do that, you'll start to feel your emotions go from negative and you're balancing them out to sort of this equilibrium again. And once you've completed these steps, the last step of this process is to then ask yourself what you need in this situation and what a strategy is to get this need met. And you can refer, for this exercise specifically, to the workbook where it has a list of your tertiary needs. Your tertiary needs are basically your moment-to-moment needs, and we're going to go in the next module to needs in general and give you a lot more insight into what your personal needs are. But before we go there, I just want you to take a moment to go through this process yourself and just get really clear on all of these steps. I want you to imagine as well that I'll hear different people say different things to me. They'll say things like, oh, but this is going to take so much time. I want you to weigh how much time this takes, maybe 3, 4 seconds, 10 seconds tops, to go through this process of interrupting the pattern of thought when you feel negatively triggered or emotional, and then substituting with something more productive. Imagine the time that it takes if you don't do that. And oftentimes what I'll see is somebody will have some kind of triggered event. They take a phone call on their way to work. They're in their car. They get off the phone. They're frustrated. They get frustrated their whole car ride to work. They get to work. They start telling their coworkers about how frustrating that call was. And then they just suffered unnecessarily for 3 hours and created their own suffering by having all these painful thoughts for hours, versus how long does it take to actually notice that you're triggered, move inwards, understand what assumptions you're making that are creating that triggering, and substitute for something healthier. I want you to know as well that a major part of this process that's very important is we're not supposed to just substitute. This isn't an exercise in positive thinking. We're not supposed to feel triggered and then just think positive thoughts, because our subconscious won't necessarily accept them. Okay, so I'm going to go into this for a moment. Let's pretend that you have years of programming that say, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, okay? And let's say these programs have all the supporting evidence. Your RAS has worked very hard, and these beliefs have become very strong self-fulfilling prophecies, and you're in a space where you don't have much to show for how you are good enough. And a lot of people ask me this question, what do I do in this situation? Well, number one, when we talk about how your subconscious mind is programmed through repetition plus emotion, emotion always has a stronger imprint than a repetition. Okay, so emotion has more weight. So let's use an example of this for a moment. Let's say that I don't have a core belief that I am unsafe. And let's say that all of a sudden I'm walking out of my day here, and there's a huge earthquake and all these structures collapse and all these people in front of me die. And, in that moment, I didn't need the repetition. In that moment, the strength or the magnitude of the emotional imprint from just that single event is highly likely to create a core belief that says I am unsafe, because just the emotional imprint is so strong in that moment itself. And so if you are having all these years of baggage around a program like I'm not good enough, and then I try to say to you, okay, start looking for how you are good enough and tell me why you're good enough, If you're feeding yourself something that your subconscious doesn't accept as truth, like if you want to sit and tell yourself, I'm good enough for any job interview ever, what's actually going to happen is you're going to elicit a subtle negative emotional response. Your subconscious is going to be like, no, we're not good enough. And through the language that you're trying to repeat, that repetition is going to come up against a wall of negative emotion. And so in doing that, you're actually more likely to keep creating the negative program. That's why things like affirmations are really not effective. Because if your subconscious doesn't believe the affirmation, then it's gonna give you negative feedback. And that emotion, because it's louder than language, is going to work against you. So, what do we do about this? When we are rewiring our thinking, when we're trying to change the way that we're thinking and perceiving situations at the thought level, we have to do two things. We have to start general and then get more specific. So let's say, for example, you're working on how you believe that you're good enough. And let's say that you are about to go into this job interview. You don't want to necessarily say, I'm going to do the best interview ever. Nobody's ever going to see an interview like this if so many parts of yourself don't believe this. Instead, you want to start general and think thoughts like, you know what? I've tried really hard to prepare for this, so I'm going to hope that this goes a lot more effectively than past interviews where I've been less prepared. Or you might say, you know what, I was picked for this, so obviously this person has enough confidence in me to take their time out of their day, so let me just show up as my best self. So you want to start general, and as you feel like these thought statements are believable, then you can get more specific. Then you can sort of allow yourself to be more clear. Like, you know what, I am good enough for this period. And you can get more specific to the belief part of the statement itself. So again, you want to make sure as you enter into doing this that you're saying suggestions to yourself when you're triggered that are actually believable. You're not here to spoon feed yourself just a whole bunch of positive thinking, because that will actually work against you. And you're not here to just affirm something without finding those emotional pieces of proof, because those things won't be believable. Now, one last thing that I'll say is sometimes we really will have almost nothing that's positive. A lot of people will say to me, let's say the belief is unworthy. Some people will say to me, there's nothing I can think of that makes me actually worthy. My life is a mess right now and I can't think of a single thing. The idea of this exercise is that it's more important to retune your dial and start focusing your attention and intention on how you are worthy. More than the intention of this exercise is to convince yourself that you're super worthy. Why? Because the subconscious is programmed through repetition plus emotion. So even if you start small and you just find little teeny tiny things about how you are worthy, the whole point of this exercise is to just stop living those old programs that are telling you that you are so unworthy and that your life's a mess, and thus you are creating those things in your external environment and in your life and reality. Because as you start changing these things over time, as you start shifting your perception and intentionally trying to get your reticular activating system to start working on behalf of the program that you are worthy, what you'll see is as a natural byproduct of this, positive results and transformation start to show up in your life. Your subconscious mind is kind of like the faithful servant to your conscious mind. Whatever suggestions you are constantly giving to yourself through that repetition and emotional piece, it is then going to create. So you can start with things that are as small as you might find. Like, I've had to do this at a very low point in my own life around this belief pattern that I am worthy. And I remember I started off with things like, I got out of bed at my first alarm, or I brushed my teeth this morning, or I showed up on time to a commitment that I made. You can start with really small things. Again, the focus of this is not to, in one fell swoop, convince yourself that you're so worthy. The intention is to start doing the reprogramming through that repetition and emotion over time. And that's where you'll see your results. So it doesn't matter where you're starting from. It doesn't matter how worthy you feel or not worthy you feel, or how far away you are from the actual programs that you want to rewire. The idea is that you use the repetition plus emotion, and that you do these things especially in real time when you are triggered. And this is how you are using your conscious mind to gain back control of your own subconscious, to stop repeating these painful experiences on autopilot and put an end to your self-created suffering that's happening without your own awareness at a subconscious level, so that you can be in charge of your emotional state.